Hey Mustangs, here we are. I've got my seat, I've got a cup full of tools, I've got some clay, and I have a project that I started before that I wanted to work on during Mustang Mutters. So first things first, when you come to the table, wherever you're gonna sit, there is a bucket with a sponge and a scraper, and usually a spray bottle also nearby. My problem is that this bucket is empty. So the first thing you're gonna do is head to the sink and fill this bucket halfway up with water before you begin working, okay? So magically, here's my bucket with water. I leave my sponge sitting right in the water and my scraper's hanging out in there too, okay? The other thing is, as a Mustang mutter, you get a cup full of tools and you have a lovely list of what those tools are right here. You're required to return this cup to me at the end of the period, clean, and with the same tools in it. This is kind of a big deal because it impacts who has those tools the next day. If you're a regular Ceramics Day student and you're using Mustang Mutters time, then you'll grab your tools out of the locker and use them, clean them, and put them away like you've been trained in the regular day. For my Mustang Mutters though, you have 7 tools in this cup. The first one is called a needle tool. Hopefully that's self-explanatory. It's kind of needle shaped, very sharp, not a toy, a tool. I often like to push my needle tool into my sponge. Then it's my holder. It has kind of a little flag on it so I notice it, and it's a really easy place I can grab it and use it. Sometimes people love to write on their ceramics with this like it's a pencil. Not my favorite use, but it's a great cutting tool for ceramics. You can also just keep it in your cup. Next up is a wooden knife. Also kind of just makes sense. It's knife-like shaped, but all made out of wood. It's an awesome tool. If I only had one tool in the world, this would be it. So you've got one of those. You have a small sponge in here. So again, you can kind of use it in your water bucket as needed. You have a glaze brush. Looks an awful lot like a paintbrush, but we glaze in ceramics, we do not paint. So that's your brush to use for applying glaze later on. You also have what's called a wooden rib, which is this funny little quarter circle shaped tool with a hole in the center, which is really for you to grip. And a rib can be used kind of like using all the tips of your fingers together to scrape and move clay easily. You can also use the tip to press in, to draw with, or clean up edges. Has a nice 90-degree angle for corners and walls. It's just a great universal tool. Then you also have a loop trim tool. It's also called a sculpture loop tool. It's a pretty big size tool, so you can have a nice grip on it. It has a round end and a squared off end, and you can use this to scoop clay away, as well as it's a great texture tool to press into clay and make all kinds of different textures on your clay. And then you have a wire cutoff tool. This one's really helpful when you're on the pottery wheels. Don't use this too much when we're sitting at the table. It's not a great tool for like cutting things off the top of a piece. If you have something like that you need to do, let me know and I'll show you a better tool to do that with. But these are the tools that are in the cup when you get it. They are the tools that should be in the cup when you're done, along with the list. Please keep it. It's a little laminated list. And they should be clean. So if you're using your tools and they get covered in clay, I don't think I'm gonna get it covered in clay here because my clay is not so sticky wet that it's gonna do that. But say I'm using it a whole lot and pretty soon I've got all this clay, I can't even get it to stick on there. I've got all this clay stuck on my tools on purpose here. The place that I'm gonna clean this is not the sink. The place I'm gonna clean it is right here in this bucket. So you can either pick up this big sponge and squeeze it out and clean your tool. That's totally fine. You can grab your small sponge and clean the tools that way. That's kind of my preferred way. And then my tools are clean and they're back in the bucket and that part's ready to go at the end of the time that I'm gonna be in here. I also have a work in progress here that's covered in plastic. And I'll show you where that plastic is. You'll see students grabbing it in the room. We have a big can and it's labeled clearly sheet plastic for wrapping work in progress. So when you have a ceramic piece or a clay piece really that you're working on, I've got this kind of dragon guy under here, you need to keep it wrapped each time you take a break from it because clay dries out really fast. So he's still in progress, don't judge me too much. He's sitting on the plastic to keep him from drying out. We have boards that you can use to keep your pieces on, especially when they're large. This is kind of huge. You don't have to make something quite this big. He's not fully assembled. He has parts that aren't yet attached. But when I'm working on him, so say I'm adding more to his head here. I'm going to add a little more and start getting his spiky things happening. So I've got my clay. I've wedged it up over at the wedging table and I grabbed off just this little piece. I'm going to wedge it up just a little bit more because I want to avoid any chance of getting any air bubbles in my clay and on my piece because I don't want my piece to blow up. And I want this guy to have some spiky things that hang off. So I'm going to pinch out some clay. You can use the table, throw clay against the table at an angle and it stretches it, makes it nice and flat and smooth. One of my favorite ways to move clay. And then I can start thinking about different shapes I want his little like things to go. I don't know dragon part names right now, especially at the end of the day, but I'm going to kind of sculpt some ear-like things that I want to attach. How do I want to attach it? I think I want to attach one here and one here. I'm going to do a separate video about scoring and slipping, but just as a little side, I just stuck those on there. They look attached, right? If I touch them, they don't fall off, but they will fall off if I don't score and slip. And I'll do a separate video so you can see it up close and personal. But I stuck them on to see if I like where they are. So far, I kind of do, even though they really do look like ears. There's going to be more, so I'm not too worried about it. But these are in a good spot, so I'm going to lift them off. I'm going to score, preferably using a toothpick tool or a fork, but in this case, I've got my needle tool right here. So I'm scoring that up. I'm going to put a little water. I'm going to score it again. I have super soft clay here, so I can attach that directly. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Water, score again, attach that on, and then I'm going to do all my cleanup and fixing. Again, that wooden knife is my best friend in here because I can use it in all the places my fingers don't fit, and if I dip it in water, it smooths the clay out kind of on its own. It's rather magical, and I can clean things up and make sure they're well attached. Okay, I'm going to use my brush and do a little more cleanup. Notice I didn't add any more water to this because I do not want to make a muddy mess. We are called Mustang Mudders because Mustang Mudders are horses that race best in mud, and we're ceramics after all, but we're not trying to make puddles of mud all over the room and on our projects. So minimal water use. Okay, and then I just look up and I notice it's gonna be time for my bus to come. I gotta go. So what do? I have to be careful now of what I just made because that's super soft and the stuff I did earlier is kind of getting messed up. But I'm gonna use my misting bottle, not a spray bottle, a misting bottle. It's already set to mist. I'm going to give it one big shot of water from the front, from the back, make sure all the parts are there, and then I'm going to carefully put my plastic all around, trying to make sure that there's no air that's going to get to my piece overnight or for a few days until I come back to it. I've got a second piece of plastic to go over the top. I'm going to tuck this in a little bit. I don't generally use tape in any way because tape, it makes you think that it will hold things where you want them, but it won't really. So I resist the urge to do that, and I just tuck things under the weight of the clay. So I'm pushing that in, tucking that down, and then I'm gonna go put this guy on the shelf where he belongs. So if I'm a ceramics student, it's gonna go in the dry room. If I'm a Mustang mudder, it's gonna go to the back corner of the room where there's a special rack just for your work. You're gonna label it with your name, and you're also gonna sign in on a clipboard so that I know what day you worked on it last, because you need to come back and continue working on a piece. If it sits idle for up to 3 weeks, it gets recycled. I do not have the room and the ability to hold pieces indefinitely. So I need you to keep coming back. It could be once a week or twice a week, but continue to work on your piece until it's complete. So I'm gonna put this guy aside, and this is the important part in this video, is I need to clean up where I was working. So even though it doesn't look like there's a big mess, that plastic had clay dust all over it. So I do have clay dust here, and you can see it and feel it on my hands, but you can't really see it on the wood because the wood is a light color. I'm gonna take my soft clay that's still super squishy and go put it right back in the recycle bin where somebody can grab it and use it. I'm gonna take my tools and clean them off, including that needle tool, my wooden knife, and rinse out your brushes really good. Kind of swirl them around in there. Get that clean. Bristles up. Don't put your brush in the can that way. It will just smash the bristles and make it terrible. So freshly cleaned brush, bristles up, drop it in that cup. And then super important is to clean this small sponge and get all the clay out of it you can, because there's enzymes in the clay that react with the enzymes in the sponges, and these start to disintegrate and like get eaten by the clay. So put that in the cup, nice and clean. And then what the heck do I do with this? I'm gonna move this spray bottle away. You do not need it for cleanup. But what I do need to do is grab my scraper. There's a flat-ish side and a rounder side. I like to hold it by the round side and use the flat side. And what I do is I scrape to the middle of the table. I never ever scrape off an edge into my hand or into the bucket or thinking I'll capture it with a sponge. It will inevitably end up on the floor with your best intentions. So scrape to the middle of the table, all the solid, all the liquid that you can, and then scoop any solid stuff right into this bucket. And then I'm gonna take my big sponge and I'm gonna wipe everything to the middle of the table. Because again, clay is microscopic. It takes a lot of it for you to really see where it is. So we use the water and the sponge and we clean the whole surface. So you're gonna do the table and even the parts where you weren't sitting, because like I just found there were pieces of clay over on the other side of the table where I didn't even work. And I know this table was clean earlier, so that means something kind of popped off the side of my plastic or something else, a tool, or when I walked by or when someone else did something. Clay, it just goes everywhere. So you gotta wipe down the whole surface. And then I'm gonna take my sponge and my bucket, have now muddy water, and go over to the sink and I'm gonna pour it into the bin in the sink. I'm not gonna pour this down the drain because that clay will clog the pipes. So this goes right into the bin, and then I'm gonna rinse the sponge so that it has clean water, wring it out really good, and then I'm gonna come back to this table and do the same thing one more time, just wiping down the whole surface. My bucket will be empty, like this one was. So pretend I've dumped this. Now I got an empty bucket, a clean sponge that's all wrung out, it goes in there. And then my spray bottle goes right inside that bucket next to it. So everything's ready for the next day or the next person to come and use this space. So do this tabletop first. Then we do the floors. You have to sweep, you have to mop. Because just like that clay that gets everywhere on this surface, it also ends up on the floor, even though you think you're being as neat and clean as possible. And that will be a video on how to get your floors clean before you go.